you know that intense moment in Avengers Endgame when Thanos snaps but nothing happens? The director and writer had us all on the edge of our seats, right? That is the magic of narrative writing, creating unexpected twists and climaxes. It is not just what happens, but how it happens. And just like Tony Stark, great writers know when exactly to deliver that final and unforgettable moment. Imagine you are holding a pen that can transport your readers to new worlds, evoke emotions, and change perspectives. Welcome to the power of narrative writing. Hello students, today we will cover narrative writing. We will explore the art of storytelling. So let us begin. So first thing first, what is narrative writing? Let us know that narrative writing tells a story, recounts an experience using literary devices to engage the reader. This is what the power of narrative writing is, that it can tell a story, recount an experience using literary devices. You see narrative writing often in novels, autobiographies, and in short stories. Whenever we read any story, any short story or a long story, that is what? None other than narrative writing. Let us now know the key elements of narrative writing, which are also the building blocks of narrative writing. These are the 5 building blocks of narrative writing. First, let's start with plot. So, plot consists of exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. We will cover this in the narrative arc, which is going to come in the upcoming slide. We will cover plot in the narrative arc. The second one is character development. For any story to be written, a character development is very important. The third and the most important thing is setting. If you have not described the settings of the story, then the reader cannot guess what kind of impact the setting can make. Fourth one is the theme. In your story, you should be directly or indirectly pointing to a theme. Fifth one is point of view. Point of view can be various. We will know more about the various types of point of view as we cover this topic. So this is what the building block of narrative writing, the building blocks of narrative writing looks like. Please pause the video and read it by yourself, and then let's begin the next part. I hope you would have gone through the elements of story writing or narrative writing. Let us now begin with description of each. So, first thing first, before diving into the topic, let us see the pre-writing stage. I have put a question here: write a story set in a historical era. So, if you are required to write a story in which is set in historical era, you should ask some questions to yourself. These are the instructions which you can ask to yourself. These are the suggestions or instructions, as you can see. What historical events or figures fascinate you? So if you are told to write a story set in historical era, some questions: historical events or figures which fascinated you or fascinate you. What cultural practices or traditions would you like to explore in your life? Or the third question which might come to your mind is: are there any historical myths, any legends, any folklores, any famous stories you would like to incorporate in your story which you are going to write on historical era? So whenever you are asked to write any narrative writing, do ask questions to yourself. If the question is not clear, then expand the question by yourself and then write the responses. Let us now go ahead. What can be the possible responses to these questions, to these instructions, if you are asking such questions to yourself? So let us see. I am interested in ancient Greece, especially the Olympics. So some of you might say that I am interested in knowing or in writing about ancient Greece. I'm highly fascinated. I myself am fascinated by ancient Greece or ancient Egypt, about the pyramids. Yeah, I am interested in ancient Greece, especially the Olympics, or some of you want to write about a female pilot in World War II. So that could also be the plot of the story. Or I have always been fascinated by the pyramids and prohas of ancient Egypt. As I was telling you that I myself am very interested about ancient Egypt. So if I were to write a narrative writing set in historical era, I would write about ancient Egypt. Let us see now. The first and the most important thing while you are writing, while you are considering to write the narrative writing, is that you need to brainstorm your ideas. So for brainstorming ideas, you need to ask some questions to yourself. You need to respond to those questions by yourself, and then make mind maps for those questions, that what could be your plot, what could be the setting, and what could be the character or characters. Whether you want just a protagonist, or you want an antagonist, or you want multiple characters in your story. Let us see some of the suggested mind maps here. You may pause the video, read the mind maps by yourself, and then let us discuss more about it. So I hope you would have gone through the mind maps. If you are to write a story set in historical era, we have already discussed some of the questions you can ask yourself to yourself. You can respond to yourself, and maybe this is what I have taken as an example. So if you are to write about ancient Greece, you can select a protagonist as an athlete. That athlete could be a male athlete or a female athlete, an athlete who's going to appear for an international games or Olympics for the first time in his life or her life, has gone through various struggles. So such a protagonist we can take. The setting is Olympic Stadium, so this is a very crucial moment of that person's life, of that athlete's life. We can take the plot as the competition, the whole competition scenario. We can take that in the plot. We can take the example of World War II if we are to write about a story set in historical era. So the plot could be a battle, the setting could be the wartime base, and the protagonist could be a female pilot, as we have seen in that answer in the response as well, that this is something you might want to write. So though the responses can vary, you can have your responses, you can have your own thoughts of writing on historical era. Some of you might be wanting to write on ancient Japan, or maybe Chinese civilization, or on Indus civilization. So that is completely your thought. I have suggested just what I think you can write. So ancient Egypt might have the plot of discovery. The protagonist can be a pharaoh, and the setting could be the Egyptian pyramid. Let's now discuss. This was all the pre-writing stage. You need to brainstorm ideas before you start writing. You need to think what you are going to write exactly. And for that, you should always make a mind map. You should always put your ideas in a sequence, that what you are going to write and what all you are going to include in it. Let us now see, if you are to write a story in historical era, these could be the three possible the questions or the prompts that you can use to write your story set in historical era. I will leave you with these instructions, and then we will discuss later. So this is what we have come to the conclusion. We have already discussed these instructions in the form of mind map in the last slide. You may take any of these prompts and you can write and create your own story. Let us now discuss the most important thing, as we were discussing, that there are 5 elements of narrative writing. So let's start with plot. The plot structure. This plot structure looks very much like a mountain, as you can see. It has a peak, and the peak is climax. But let's begin with the beginning, with the starting. So the first is in the plot structure an exposition. It is a setup. So you need to write the settings in it. The second one is rising action, in which the conflict builds. There is a problem in the story. And then there is a turning point in the story, which is called the climax. After that, we are going to come on resolution, which is also called the falling action. And the last one is the conclusion. So the falling action is almost reaching to a solution, and a resolution is the final conclusion, wherein you can put your story either on a cliffhanger, or you can give your story a good ending, an ending which would satisfy your reader. Remember to not leave your reader in a confusion. Always end your story either with a cliffhanger, or if you have taken a complex conflict in the story, or do ensure that you solve that conflict in your story. So that makes your story intriguing and interesting, because in the leader, if it is the reader is left dissatisfied, it does not actually includes in a great narrative. Let us now discuss the plot structure. As we were discussing, we will talk about plot in the narrative arc. So this is what the narrative arc looks like. I will leave you with the narrative arc. As we have seen already, the narrative arc looks like a mountain. Please do give a reading to all, and then let us discuss more about it. I hope you would have gone through the plot structure, the narrative arc. Let us now discuss it in detail. So the first step, or the first part of the narrative arc, is the exposition. This is the exposition, which is the first part. This includes the background information of the plot, that includes characters and settings. So in the exposition, you are supposed to give the background information of the character, and you need to describe the settings of the story. The second part is the rising action, where major events that add suspense or tension to the plot that will lead to the climax actually is written. The third part is the climax, the most suspenseful part of the plot, the turning point for the protagonist, as I told you, and this is why it is the peak of our story. And a good story always needs to have this peak. Although there are stories which have various small peaks, but your story should have this one major peak, the maximum peak. So this is what the peak looks like, the climax, and the climax has the most intriguing part of your story. The next one is the falling action, events that unravel the conflict between the protagonist and the antagonist that lead to the resolution. So this is where the falling action happens, where most the solution is near. And the last part is resolution. The conflict is completely resolved, finally resolved, and we discover whether the protagonist achieves their goal or not. So this is what the narrative arc looks like, starting from the first one, which is the exposition, the second one being the rising action, the third one being the climax, and the fourth one being the falling action, and the fifth one and the last one is being the resolution. So this is how your story looks like, and it should have this peak, which is of the climax. Let us now move ahead and let us study the narrative arc and the peaks of some stories. So, I have a suggestion for you. Before we begin, please stop the video and go read the story, The Gift of the Magi. The Gift of the Magi. You are supposed to read the story. I am leaving the description of the link. I am leaving the link in the description so that you can go through the story before we analyze the narrative arc. You may pause the video and read the story. I hope you would have read the story The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry. O. Henry has written this story. Let us now analyze the narrative arc as shown by this story. As I told you, various stories, almost all stories, whether it be long or short, always show the narrative arc in its disposition. Let us see this by the example of The Gift of the Magi. So the exposition of that story introduces the protagonist couple, Jim and Della, struggling financially during Christmas. As you know in the story, this happened. Then the next is rising action. The second part, the first one was the exposition where the couple was introduced. The setting was of Christmas. The second one is rising action. Della wants to buy Jim a special Christmas gift and Jim wanted a chain for his prized possession, a gold watch. However, she lacks the funds. She cuts and sells her long beautiful hair to buy the chain. So you would have read this in the story that she wanted to buy a gift for her husband and she did not have a lot of money. She only had $1.17 if I'm not wrong. Then the climax is there in which Jim returns home and Della presents him with the chain. So when Jim reaches home, what he sees that Della is gifting him a chain. However, Jim has sold his watch, and you know that why Jim has sold his watch? To buy a gift for Della. To buy Della a set of beautiful combs for her hair, which she saw in a shop, and she greatly admired those combs. This is why Jim wanted to gift her those combs. So this is what the irony or the climax in the story. This is what the peak of the story is, where it is being realized that both Jim and Della have sold their prized possessions and their valuable items to show sacrifice and to show their love by gifting each other something. Let us see the following action. The couple realizes the irony and sacrifice they have made for each other because of the love that they shared. And the resolution is, despite the material gifts being useless now, they understand the true gift is their love and sacrifice for each other. I will suggest you to go through the story before we analyze this narrative arc. If you would have done this, then you will have understood that how beautifully this story has shown the relation with the narrative arc. So it had these 5 points of the narrative arc. Let us now see the narrative arc. Let us now study the narrative arc of the second story, The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. So I will again leave you with the story. I have put the link of the story in the description box. Please go through that before we start analyzing the narrative arc of this story. Please pause the video, read the story, and then let's come back and discuss the narrative arc of the story. So, students, let us now analyze the narrative arc of the story, The Telltale Heart. So, the first one is exposition, and the exposition is the introduction, the settings, the character building, the unnamed character. As you know that the narrator was anonymous, it was not named, did not have any name, introduces himself and explains his nervous disposition. And then a rising action is there. The narrator becomes increasingly unhinged, focusing on the old man's evil eye. He had a problem, he had a conflict with the evil eye. He plots and executes the old man's murder. Then the climax, the narrator kills the old man. As I told you, this peak has this mountain has its peak and dismembers his body. This is where the climax is shown to us, or the climax comes. Then comes the following action. The narrator becomes convinced. The police can hear the old man's heart beating beneath the floorboards. Then the resolution. The narrator's guilt drives him to confess to the crime, believing the police are mocking him. So this is what the narrative arc of the telltale heart looks like. Let us now discover more on this topic. So let us see the next element of narrative writing, which is setting. We have discussed by far plot. We are now discussing the second one, setting. So setting has a great impact on your narrative writing. How? Setting establishes mood and atmosphere. It is the setting. If the settings are dull, you know you are expecting a dullness in the story as well. If there is too much of brightness being described in the story, then you are expecting something positive. So this is inferential, this is implicit and explicit. So your settings actually play a very great role in your narrative writing. The second one, it influences character actions and decisions as well. The settings play influence to your character actions and their decisions, provides context to the story, that why the story is set in a particular setting, helps readers visualize the story. So this helps in imagery or the imagination. This helps in imagination to the readers. This is why settings are really important. You describing the settings is very important. You covering all aspects of it, whatever you want to add in your story, whatever message you want to convey to your reader has to be conveyed through the settings as well. Let us now discuss the next aspect. So there are types of settings. There are numerous settings which are uncountable in number, but we are going to take some of those examples. Let us see. So we are discussing different types of settings. So the first is historical setting. The second one is fantasy setting. You would have heard what kind of setting is used in fiction, in fictional stories. Futuristic setting, and the last one is realistic setting. Again, I am telling you that there are numerous settings, types of settings which one can use. We are taking examples of some of these settings which I have mentioned here on the screen. So a specific time period in the past. If you have read, which I am supposing that you already have read, The Great Gatsby, which is set in the 1920s America, which shows American dream versus reality. It has historical setting, and the setting was of 1920s. So this is how the setting of the novel is historical. The second one, let us see futuristic setting. So the novel, the story Blade Runner, it has dystopian future, a hypothetical future time period. So it has futuristic setting. Let us now see the example of fantasy setting. If you have read Lord of the Rings, it has Middle Earth setting, fantasy setting, fictional setting, imaginary world or realm. So the setting of Lord of the Rings is fantasy, or it has an imaginary world in it. Realistic setting is To Kill a Mockingbird. This is about contemporary and everyday world. The realistic setting has been shown in this novel. I will leave you with these 4 examples. You can go through them once again, and then we will continue. So students, let us continue more into the topic. Let us see sensory details, which are very important, which is again a part of the settings only. While you are writing writing the story, you adding the sensory details is very important. As we all know, descriptions is what makes your story inferential. You can convey one message just by your descriptions. So those descriptions include your 5 senses. So let us now know how to incorporate sensory details. So these are the 5 sensory the sense organs which one uses. So you need to show sight, describe what can be seen. So you can take examples like the sun-drenched streets of Paris. So you can actually imagine that what the scene looks like. Next one is smell. Describe what can be smelled. The salty air of the ocean. So this is what we read lots of times in novels, in magazines, in articles. So this is how you should also write. The next one is touch. Describe what can be felt. The rough texture of tree bark. So this is what you need to do. The next one is sound. Describe what can be heard. The chatter of pedestrians in Times Square. The taste can be described as what can be tasted. The sweetness of freshly baked cookies. So you should incorporate all these 5 senses in your descriptions, in your narrative writing as well, while you are describing either your character or your settings. Let us now see the next one, which is example. We are discussing the analysis of the 2 descriptions from the 2 stories. So I will be showing you these 2 very small paragraphs from these stories, from these novels. The first one is The Great Gatsby by Scott Fitzgerald, and the second one is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Let us see the first example, which is of The Great Gatsby. So I am showing you this excerpt from chapter 2. Please pause the video, read the passage, the paragraph, and find out what is being mentioned in the story which makes it stand out from any normal story which one writes or which one can write. I hope you would have read the excerpt from this from the chapter 2 of the novel The Great Gatsby. Let us now see one more example, which is of an excerpt from chapter 1 of the novel To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I am again leaving you with this paragraph. Please go through it, analyze it thoroughly, and notice what all is being written, what all details are being mentioned here. I hope you would have read the 2 excerpts from both the stories. Let us see what all it had in it. So the first thing first is imagery and symbolism, which is very important to your story. As I told you, descriptions are really important. Use of figurative language is very important. In both the stories, we have seen imagery and symbolism being used. And you would have seen that in Ashes, Valley, Garden, Smoke. So this is the imagery. So as you can see, this is smell, this is sight, again sight, and this is smell. So uses of 5 senses, if not all 5, at least any of those 5. The second one is use of vivid descriptions to establish atmosphere. So there were vivid descriptions which actually establishes your atmosphere. So ghastly creek, powdery air. Such descriptions using of adjectives, adverbs creates a good an atmosphere which you want for your story, which a writer wants for their story. Contrast between settings. So if you have read the whole story of The Great Gatsby, you would have seen that there were valleys, there were wealthy communities living, and there was a community, again there were communities which were not so wealthy. So that was the contrast between the settings. Example, wealthy communities versus the Valley of Ashes. Impact of setting on characters and plot. So whatever setting you are describing, it has an impact on your plot, as we have discussed. And whatever the author wants to or intends to convey, that is also shown through settings. So that were the two examples where you need to see and notice and observe that how these settings play a pivotal role in building an atmosphere which you want for your story as a writer. Let us now do an exercise, a quick exercise. Take a pen and write in a page your description about a familiar place using sensory details. You know, use your 5 senses, all those: sight, smell, taste, touch, and hear. So use these 5 senses to record your observations or record your answer. I am leaving you with this. Let's continue after you are done writing. So I had given you 3 prompts, the school, home, and park. Let us see what one can write. Although your answer can be very different from mine, from what I am showing, completely different. So it is not that our answers needs to match, but this could be a possible response. I'm leaving you with the possible response. You may read it and then let us continue. So some of you might have written something about the school, that's your school having freshly waxed floors, maybe freshly mopped floors you would have written, or the sound of lockers slamming, or maybe the sound of monkeys, if you have some monkeys around in the neighborhood of the school, the sight of colorful posters on the walls, or maybe something else, maybe a collage. So that is what one can write about school. Home, the warmth of the fireplace, the taste of freshly baked cookies, the feel of soft carpet underfoot. And the park, the sound of children laughing, the sight of green grass and blooming flowers, the smell of freshly cut grass. This is what one can write in the description of these 3. Let us now continue with the next one, which is character development. So we have by far covered 2, the plot structure, the settings. Let us now cover the character development in a narrative writing. So crafting compelling characters is really important to your story, as we again already know that the settings and the characters play an essential part in your narrative writing. So give your characters unique traits, motivations, and goals, something which is related to what you are trying to convey to your reader. Show character growth and change. Use dialogues effectively. Use dialogue effectively in your narrative writing, and you know that dialogues are something which are to be spoken by the characters. Then we have already discussed about the settings, that the settings establishes the scene. We have to use those 5 senses, create atmosphere and mood, consider cultural and historical context. If you are writing your story, take everything in context, whatever can be written and included in your story. If you are writing a story about historical era, take the context of history. So take historical context. The next one is theme. So theme, as I told you, can be directly or indirectly conveyed to your reader. The underlying message is what theme is. Explore universal themes like love, loss, identity. These are just examples. You can use more themes as per your choice, maybe resolution, or maybe solitude, or maybe self-identity, or discovery, or mystery. Anything could be the theme. So as taking the story, whatever narrative writing that you are writing, it should be in context to that only. Develop a clear message or idea. Avoid didacticism. So this is very important. Avoid preaching. Avoid conveying a message to your readers. Avoid telling what can be done or should be done, because readers are really not interested in what you have to say, unless it has something, some mystery. If your story has some mystery to offer, then your readers will always be interested in reading that piece. So in order to make your story interesting, always remember to keep a climax, to keep a falling action, and to resolve the conflict which was mentioned in the story. Let us see the next part, which is the point of view. As I told you that there could be various point of views in telling your story. So the narrator's perspective could be these three types. Let's start with the first one and the common one, which is the first person perspective, I and we. The first person perspective is the narrator is a character within the story. The narrator is only a character, and that character is narrating the complete story. It has very limited perspective and biased opinions because the narrator is itself in the story. And it has a personal and intimate narrative. This is why it has the first person written stories are always intimate and has personal narrative, because you are only showing your side, or the narrator is only showing their side and not able to see from others' perspective. Let us know the second type of story writing, which is third person omniscient, all knowing. So narrator has complete knowledge of characters and events. Omniscient means all knowing, can see into multiple characters' minds, provides broad perspective and insight. So this third person omniscient is knowing everything, and this is why it has a broad perspective. The third one is third person perspective, which is very limited. Whenever the story is written in he, she, and they, narrator is outside the story, focusing on a single character, limited knowledge aligned with the chosen character, and it provides flexibility and objectivity in the story. So these are the three types of POVs. You may pause the video and read it by yourself, and then let's continue more into the topic. So I hope you have gone through the three types of narratives that we have discussed. Let us now continue with writing tips. So while you are crafting your narrative, some things that you need to keep in your mind. The most important is show, don't tell. But what is the meaning of show, don't tell? Show, don't tell means when you are showing but not telling. So you don't need to be direct to your readers. Instead, show what you want to convey to your readers. So let us see and understand that with an example. So Sarah felt sad. That is telling. You are directly telling your reader that Sarah is a girl who's feeling sad. But you can show that Sarah is sad by writing differently. Sarah's eye drooped and she trudged through the rain. So Sarah, her eyes drooped and she was trudging through the rain. This is what? It is showing sadness. So this is actually showing, not telling. So this is what the tactic of show don't tell is. So whenever you are writing descriptive or narrative writing, always follow show don't tell. So your showing don't tell can work with the actions that you're writing about the characters, or the dialogues, or the body language, or by including sensory details. So that is by showing and not telling. The second one is which is using active voice makes writing more engaging and concise. So you should not use passive voice in your writing. Do not use passive voice in your writing. So what is active voice and what is passive voice? Let us see that through an example. So the ball was thrown by John. This is passive way of saying. When you are taking an agent. So, and the next one is John threw the ball. That is active. When you are when the subject is doing the action, that is called active, and when any object or the subject is receiving the action, that is called passive. Refrain from avoid writing passive, include only active voice in your narrative writing. Let us see the next step, which is of using varying sentence structure. So your story should have varying types of sentences. You should not always write long sentences. Instead, make a mix and match of both the types of sentences. Include long sentences, but do include short sentences, which could be as short as just one word. So mix short and long sentences for rhythm and flow, which makes your writing interesting and intriguing. So the example is the door creaked open. This is just one short sentence, which can be also written like this. As the door creaked open, a warm light spilled into the room, illuminating the dusty furniture. So your story should have a combination of both of them. It should be descriptive and it should be those short sentences as well. And the last tip to write your narrative writing is by reviewing your work. So review your clarity. If you are clearly conveying what you want to convey to your readers, if there is a coherence between the paragraphs, between the paragraphs of the plot structure, between your ideas, if you are using the correct grammar or not, if you have used the correct tense or not. As we know, narrative writing is storytelling, and stories are always written in past. So if you are writing in present, ponder upon that, if that present tense is required or not. If required, then yes. The last one is punctuation, and very important. So always pay attention to usage of commas and exclamation marks and full stops. Those also play very important role in curating your narrative writing as what it should look like. And the last slide of the module is this one. I will leave you with this. Go through it and then let us wrap it up. So the last slide is nothing but starting your own narrative journey. So write a short narrative using the following: the mysterious box, and it has a prompt also, as you can see, and some guidelines too, that use show don't tell, do not use passive, use active, and use varied sentence structures, incorporate sensory details, explore themes of identity, memory, nostalgia. So this is what you should do and practice at home writing. With this, we will end this video. Let us conclude this video, and I hope all of you have learned a lot about narrative writing. In future, we will explore more about narrative writing and its rubrics and what kind of vocabulary you can include in it. So this was the end of the video. Stay curious and keep growing, keep learning. Love what you watched? Give it a thumbs up, share it with friends, and subscribe for more.